Can Washington get to 10 wins in 2025? We've got our record predictions coming up.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers out there, fall camp starts this week. So you want all the latest updates from everything going on around the football team. There's going to be some basketball stuff coming up this week as well. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Huskies right here on YouTube and wherever else you get your podcast, and click that little bell as well so you never miss when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the show out a lot. Now, Lars, got one of our favorite shows of the year coming up for all the everydayers today. We've broken it down into 3 segments where it'll be 4 games each. And we are going through Washington's schedule for the 2025 college football season. And we're kicking it off with the 4 games in September, or 1 in August, even, Colorado State, UC Davis, Washington State, and Ohio State. So we're just going to go through game by game, give our record predictions. And by the end of the show, you'll know where we stand on all this. We've been teasing this for months.
Yeah, it's the old tried and true tradition of we know exactly what's going to happen in late July, and we go to in September, and it's like, hey, we knew exactly what was going to happen, so we don't even show up half the time. No, that's not true. But with that being, well, it's half true because we usually get it pretty close to right in a way. But I think we'll start.
We were this close to being dead on last year.
Yeah, I was gonna say and the year before too, obviously made it a little easier because we just win, and here we go. but with that being said, obviously it was Colorado State's first.
Colorado State's first. Yep.
I like what Jay Norvell is doing there. I think he's still there in Colorado Springs, but this should be an easy win for Jed. You just kind of get the wheels going. It's what Jed talked about at Big Ten Media Days last week, where why face any Power 4 teams? Like really, like you just go to the lower level, pick 3 guys in your region, and call it a day. I think this is the first one.
No, I do agree. And, the whole SEC scheduling mantra that he was backing up Kurt Cignetti on, I really enjoyed that whole just shot at the conference. I thought that was very funny. But it's a good point where if you can have these quote-unquote warm-up games against a lower-level opponent, you just need to make sure you handle business. And I think there are going to be some questions that need to be answered against both Colorado State and UC Davis, where Colorado State is certainly no slouch. And I like what they brought to the table the last couple of years. And so I'm curious to see how this game is going to play out. I certainly think Washington is going to win, and we're going to, see some of the true freshmen and some of the backups get some time in the second half. But that's a game I'm going to be keeping a very, very close eye on, because there are a lot of questions that I think fans are going to come into the season with that maybe aren't able to get out to fall camp and see, how the offensive line is gelling, who's standing out on the defensive line, those sorts of just different little things that are going to be very important for this upcoming season. That said, I think Washington wins that game, and I think they have a bigger win against UC Davis the following week.
Yeah, wasn't that Chris Peterson's old school? I think back in the day where when he played quarterback, I believe, quarterback or receiver. Yeah, another relatively easy win for Washington. These are the type of games. It's why you get the freshmen in. It's why John Mills and Chancellor will probably play 1 or 2 games to start out, just because these are the games that you should be winning 35-3, 42-10, in the third going into the fourth quarter, so you can allow some of those freshmen to play. One thing I am curious of with both of these games, because I think they'll be relatively easy wins for Washington, how much does DeMond play? How much do the freshmen see, or Kai Horton? Because I think Jed wants to make sure some of those guys behind, and they don't need to stat pad DeMond that early in the season. And
I think they're going to.
I have a fear that they're going to, but I think Jed does have enough self-respect, because when we talk about certain games and we talk about the Heisman and Jaden Daniels and first Michael Bennett, and we look at some of those early games where, he did it against, Northwest Directional State, all those sorts of things. You don't necessarily you look at it against the best of the best. You look at his 6 games against these top SEC schools versus these top Big Ten schools. You don't look at he threw for, 600 yards against UC Davis in week 2. It's like, as he should. I mean, what are we doing?
No, I certainly hear you. I just think that that's one of those things where Speaking of Jaden Daniels, those 18 touchdowns that he had in those 3 non-conference games are probably what set him apart from Michael Penix that year. Not that that's correct, not that I agree with that, but that is what really set him apart. It's, oh, well, he set a record with this many touchdowns. It's, well, how many did he throw for an SEC play? Different things like that. And I don't want to take anything away from him. He's a very talented quarterback, but that is certainly something to consider. And I just think knowing Jed and knowing how he's pumped Demond up all offseason, we are going to get to, after the bye week, get to the Washington State game. And we're going to hear Jed saying, well, he's completed this many passes. Look, he's like top 5 in the nation in yards through 2 games because he's done this or that. I can guarantee you that we're going to hear something like that if these things do come to fruition. And again, after the bye week, Washington State is up. I honestly think it's more important than the Ohio State game. And hear me out when I say that, because we have not seen Jedd Fisch win on the road. This has been a talking point all offseason, something that is really, really important to do. And going over to Pullman, going to Martin Stadium, that certainly is not an easy task. And after seeing how this game went last year, where I think that was a much more talented Wazoo team than we're going to see this fall, you still can't take anything for granted in this rivalry. And we've seen close games the last couple of years now. Didn't matter who was coaching it because of, I think some of that certainly has to do with the ending of the conference and different things like that, which aren't RIP Pac-12, by the way. Unfortunate. But I look at this game and I do think that Washington is going to come out of it at 3-0, but that is going to be the biggest test for me in the month of September. I think that Ohio State is just a different level of challenge. So when I say biggest test, it's something that obviously you need to show that you can beat the elite of the elite. And I want you to, spend a lot of time talking about Ohio State because I know you have a bold prediction there, a little teaser. But I look at this Washington State game and we just look at Big Ten play, going to Maryland, going to Michigan, going to Wisconsin, going to UCLA, the rest of the road games. If you can't win at Washington State, how are we going to be able to have faith that you can go to Maryland and win, that you can go to the big house and win? I think that's very, very important.
So I agree. And also you can look at it from the sentiment of don't look past Wazoo to Ohio State. You still have to win that one because that is your in-state rivalry until Oregon moves its campus north of Vancouver. And then we have that discussion then. But it's also the case of it's going to be a different team because Jimmy Rogers is now there, Jake Dickerson in Wake Forest. Zevi Eckhouse is not John Mateer as much as I love Zevi. This is a much more winnable game than I think last year was kind of a toss-up because it's Jed's first year, brand new roster, completely overturned offensive line. That was a gettable game for Wazoo in a neutral site. With that being said, going to Pullman, I don't think is as much of a factor for this team because I think DeMond can handle that, especially playing it right out and things like that. But I do think it's going to be a stylistic change where if this is a 2017, 17-13 game, I'm not going to be surprised. Just because I think Jimmy Rogers is going to make it more of a, no pun intended, dogfight and kind of make Jed earn it. So I think they come out with a win on this and go to 3-0 going into the Ohio State game. But I think it's going to look a lot more dirty, just kind of that old fashioned, sure. Almost in a way, kind of
what. It's a gritty football game.
Exactly. Because, you did the Wazoo preview. You know what that roster looks like. It's not going to be 400 yards through the air. It's going to be 250 yards and 35 carries on the ground. So you're going to have to be able to weather that storm.
Shout out to Lindy Sports, by the way, for that preview. But let's move on to Ohio State. Because one of the reasons I say that that's the bigger test is I do believe Washington can hang with Ohio State. I think this game is somewhat gettable with it being so early in the year, but there's just so much talent on that roster coming off a national championship. I think that they might have the 2 best players in college football on that roster in Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith. So as of right now, I'm going to chalk this one up as a loss, but I think there's an opportunity for, couple things fall the wrong way. We'll see how they play against Texas. That's going to be really interesting. I don't want to, just go out and say right now that that's the upset that I'm predicting. I'll get to mine a little bit later on, but I think that this game might be a little bit more gettable, and whatever the spread is, Washington will cover that, but I don't think they win that game right now.
This is one where I think Washington does get the win and goes to 4-0. And the reason why I say this is Ryan Day now has a national championship. Do we see a similar Ryan Day? Do we see that same hunger when it's rebuilt, when he was already bored on third base and things like that? I think this is a game for Jed to establish himself in the Big Ten, especially at home. If this game was in Columbus, I think Ohio State wins. I think they potentially cover just because there's going to be so many different things working. And Jed knows what that home winning streak is like. You get the two cupcakes against UC Davis and Colorado State. You beat Wazoo on the road. Now you come back home to defend the home turf. You should get to 23 with that win, or 25. What is it at?
That'd be 23.
23. Okay, yeah. So you get the 23-game home streak. That, to me, like, that matters so much to Jed. I think he's going to find a way, whether it's, 42, 41, 40, 50, 49, whatever it ends up being, Jed's going to find a way. Like, if he wins one game next season, it is going to be that one.
All right. That's a bold prediction. I like it. Let's move on to the month of October. Right after a message from our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. One thing I noticed when I started using Monarch was just how much I'm spending on food delivery. Now, budgeting smarter, saving more, and I can afford that extra tub of protein powder for after a nice hard workout. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKDOWNCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKDOWNCollege for half off your first year. Lars, coming out of the Ohio State game where you have them at 4-0, I have Washington at 3-1. We're going to see the longest road trip of the year with Washington heading across the country to Maryland. I'm not too sold on this Maryland roster right now. I think it's going to be one of the weaker ones in the Big Ten. It's going to be a long trip. And this is another reason why I was talking about that Washington State game as being so critical. Because let's say you do drop that game again against an inferior roster. I feel like people are going to be very, very concerned coming into this Maryland game where it's, hey, are you going to be able to, travel multiple time zones and win? Which is something, obviously you weren't able to do last year because you didn't win any games on the road. And I look at what Maryland brings to the table. I look at this Washington roster. I look at the scheme and how everything is going to be improved, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And I think you have an opportunity to take this game, which would move them to 4-1 for me.
So think 2023 Arizona State, where you beat Oregon. You have this momentous occasion. Again, I had them beating Ohio State. So you have this massive win. You are now, Jedd Fisch is on every show in America saying, hey, Demond, this and that. This is the game where it's like you're going to need Mish Powell to have a pick six, and I don't think that's going to come to fruition. And I do like Mike Locksley. I've been to College Park a couple of times. It is a very nice campus, very nice stadium. I do think that could also be if it's like a 12:30 kickoff, that wouldn't surprise me. And then maybe Washington is jet lag going in. I think it's going to be a weird loss. It'll be a close loss. It won't be like a catastrophic, Maryland's going to blow them out because I don't even know who's on their roster. I'll just tell you that right now. But with that being said, I think this is just it's a letdown game where you get the 4-0 and then you just drop one, and almost in a way it will allow the program. Nobody likes to hear this, but hit reset, catch yourself early before the Michigan, Wisconsin, other games at the working game, obviously at the end of the season, which we'll get to. But it would be a good early season loss where it's not Wazoo, so you prove you can win on the road, but you're still not all the way there. So you're going to drop this game in Maryland.
So I hear you. I think that if that does happen, no matter, what happens at Washington State, people are going to be very, very concerned because it kind of just holds this up of, oh, can you win on the road in conference play now? Because then you go from a, nice campus, as you say, to a much tougher environment in 2 weeks when you play Michigan. But before you do that, you have to come home and play Rutgers. And this is a game I'm really interested in where after what happened last year with just how messy and disgusting that game was, I think you have an opportunity to, get revenge if you want to put it that way, because that game was so gettable for Washington. You had every opportunity to win that game. And I think Greg Schiano is a good coach. He's done a really good job with that program. But coming out to Washington, I think that's going to be really tough for just that squad making that trip going the other way. And this is one where I don't think that roster is what it was last year, where, we've seen Kyle Monangai go to the NFL. We've seen, I know they still got Khalid Manis, but I just don't think that roster, much in the same light as Maryland, is what Craig Schiano needs to succeed with. And I think he's going to make up for that, especially defensively. But I think with what Washington brings to the table this season, you're not going to have those same missteps that you did last year, especially now that you're playing at home.
Yeah, and who was the player that ran on the field?
Vincent Holmes.
Okay, and Vince is still with the team. So with that being said, I do think another year older, another year wiser, young guys, old guys, I think they learned from everything. And you're coming back home for this game. I do think this is a win for Washington. Again, a lot of these games, and it's worth noting, people are going to probably hate to see this, but there is some truth into what Jed says with the NFL equivalent, where you see teams blowing it out in the second quarter, third quarter, but then at the end, you look at the final score in the NFL, and it's, oh, wow, that was a 9-point game. That was a 7-point game. It's like, yeah, the Big Ten is kind of similar in that, where it's like, these are going to be closer than you would expect games. Washington won't win by like 21, but I do think it'll be a comfortable win when you look at all the measurables for Washington at the end of the day. But it'll be a good test for them to come back home and win, but I do think they get it.
So I like where you're going with there. So just now that we're halfway through the season, update the Everydayers on your record prediction.
So I believe we're at 5-1. Right?
Yeah, we're both at 5-1 in different ways.
Yeah.
So that brings us to Michigan. This is a game that I want to say this right off the top. I know I kind of said it with Ohio State. I believe it way more with Michigan. This is a very, very winnable game. I'm saying that because I don't have them winning that game right now. But I have a lot of questions about this Michigan roster. I think it's very, very talented, but it's also somewhat inexperienced. We saw what they did last year. I have a few questions about Sharon Moore too, after just the way that they dropped some of those games last season. Obviously, they got up for Ohio State, and that was really impressive, but they lost several games they shouldn't have. And playing at the Big House after what happened in Seattle last year, I'm sure there's going to be that same, revenge factor that I was just talking about with Rutgers. Obviously more so because that was a much larger upset with Michigan being in the top 10 at that time. And we can't sit here and know what Bryce Underwood is going to look like, because no matter how talented he is, no matter he's, the number one overall recruit, that doesn't matter anymore. We have not seen him throw a pass in college football, which is one of the most ridiculous things when I look at some of these Big Ten quarterback rankings and people are already placing him ahead of DeMond Williams. That is just insane to me. I'm not saying that he's not talented. I'm not saying that he can't get there, but putting him there right now is absolutely wild. And I do have a lot of confidence that Washington can walk away with that win right now. But as of this moment, I think that's going to be a really tough test and one of those hard fought, you talked about it earlier with the Wazoo game, gritty 21-17 kind of ball games that right now I think Washington comes out on the losing end of.
Yeah, this is one where I'm with you. I think they come out with a loss, but 1,000%. Like if you tell me 2-3 months from now Washington won this game, I'm like, cool. Yeah, I'm not like I said they would lose, but I'm also not surprised that they won. And I think that's just kind of the uncertainty, and having been to the Big House before, shout out Jimmy Lake for that 21 trip. Thank you for that lovely barn burner. But with that being said, that was, I got to meet El Presidente and all those sorts of things. So it was a cool experience, and I do think the players, but again, that's why I'm going to always lean on this game will be certainly closer than people think from the outside looking in because of that trip to the whiteout. I think DeMond knows how to handle these big time, environments and things like that. So it's exactly what I think Washington will win. But I do agree for the sake of argument and also because there's a surprise coming down the line here for me as well, aside from the Ohio State game, that I do think Washington loses this game. But again, like I said, if we come back and they won, we're equally not surprised.
So this is the most interesting part of the schedule, this 3-game stretch. We'll get to the last game on the other side of the break because that rounds out October. You come home and you play Illinois. This Illinois team is getting a lot of hype coming into the year, rightfully so. They're returning so much production from last season. So that's just kind of what happens. People are really high on Luke Altmaier. I think he's a talented guy. I don't know if he's a top 3 quarterback in this conference. I think he's there right now because of just how much inexperience there is in this conference right now. I think this is a game Washington wins. And this might go down as I don't think it should, depending on a couple other things that might happen, but I think this will go down as that signature win of the year for Washington. Because if Illinois comes into this game, I believe they've already played Ohio State, and I have them losing that one as well. If they come into this game with one loss, they're probably going to be ranked in the top 15. They're probably going to be getting a lot of steam, probably going to be, a huge atmosphere, everything like that. I think Washington wins this game, and I'm fairly confident in that one, no matter what Illinois comes into this game with, what kind of hype they come in with.
This is the game as a callback. This is the game that wins Ryan Walters the Burroughs Award. This is one where he somehow, because again, Brett Bielema was mentioned by Jedd Fisch as the guy that, credited him for helping Ryan get to UW and the interview process and all those sorts of things. And again, that doesn't take away anything from Jed and Damon, what they'll do. But I do think, this might be a game where Ryan Walters just schemes up some things and says, hey, you know what, Luke Altmaier, you think you're the best? Watch this. And, we really see the reemergence of, if you will, of Ryan Walters, as they, one of the best, if not the best, assistant coaches in the country with the Burroughs Award.
I like that a lot because it's just one of those things where those two coaches are just so familiar with each other. That chess match is going to be something I know we're going to be talking about a lot during that game week. But Lars, let's move on to the Wisconsin game. Right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Game Time comes in. Game Time makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. If you're tired of endless scrolling, trying to find the best deal, Game Time's zone deals pick the best seats in your section for you, which I absolutely love when I go to Mariners games. I used to watch Paul Skeens and the Pittsburgh Pirates. I used to watch the Boston Red Sox when they were in town. It is a phenomenal deal. You can take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Lars, this Wisconsin game is really interesting. One of my bold predictions for this one is by the time Washington reaches Madison, Luke Fickell will not be the head coach of the Wisconsin Badgers. I took that into account when making this prediction because one thing, you and I were going back and forth before we pressed record, and we were like, let's save some of this for the show. I was vehement, but the fact that Washington will win at least one of Michigan and Wisconsin, I can absolutely see that happening. I'm going to just say that it will be this one because I think that Madison, when it's rocking, can be as tough of a place to play as the Big House. I've, from some friends that have been there, from just everything that environment is. Obviously, the Big House is much larger. I was going to say bigger, but we don't need to, just continue to repeat ourselves here. But that is a just underrated, really tough to place to play in the world of college football. I just don't have any faith in that offense, man. I can't. And I think that, you talk about Ryan Walters and what we talked about a week or two ago with the one award, who gets it, winning the Broyles Award, as the Everydayers know. I think that this is another game where he can just kind of flex his muscle, where this is going to sound really bold, but it's one of those games where, if Wisconsin walks out of that game and they have like 170 yards of total offense because of what Ryan Walters was able to do in that game, I'm not going to sit here and be shocked. So I have Washington winning this game.
Yeah, I was going to say, is Jonathan Taylor still in the backfield in Wisconsin?
Nope. No Monty Ball either. He's long gone. Melvin Gordon long gone.
And Scott Tolzien's no longer the quarterback there, right?
Nope.
Okay. So I love Camp Randall. Don't get me wrong. Dad's from Wisconsin, so I love Camp Randall. It's one of the most beautiful places to play. But the product on the field, not as beautiful as the stadium right now. And I think that will be another reason why Washington, and just to update the Everydays here, goes to 7-2 with this win at Wisconsin. You check another box and answer the question that you had earlier. Can you win in the conference play on the road? And I think that's another good example of one where it's not the toughest, but not certainly below, 5 or 6 in terms of toughest to play in the conference. I think it's another signature-ish win for Jed because you do get, and we can, I'm sure how much of that game leading everything is going to be the battle of the W's. And I'm going to be sick and tired.
I really hope so. I wrote about this like last year over on Huskies Wire, where I've seen this going around on Twitter a lot of Wisconsin fans being like, oh, we're the real UW, and Washington fans, oh, we're the real UW. Washington is the real UW. Like there's no doubt about that in either of our minds. It was, I think Wisconsin was founded first by like a few years, but you go through all the stats of both football programs, Washington is the real UW. And in my opinion, it's really not that close. So this is where the schedule gets a little interesting in the 2 weeks leading up to Oregon, because then you come home and you play Purdue. And this is a game where, with the talent that Purdue has and everything, just kind of, I don't want to say it feels like an early season matchup, but I just don't have a lot of faith in what the Boilermakers are going to do. They're finishing last in the conference again. I'm not going to be shocked. There's just not much going on there.
See, I'm 100% with you, but for everything it's still a win. I'm still giving Washington the win here. But I will say this has some feelings of Alabama Vanderbilt that do kind of scare. No. And the reason why I say it is because it's a game that you should absolutely not lose, and you shouldn't even be worried going into the fourth quarter. That's where I feel about this game. But given that you mentioned it's a mid-late November game, and by the way, there's some players on Purdue that are still there that might be motivated to go against their former coach, and there's not a ton, but enough to say it won't be a massive blowout, but I do think Washington should handle this game pretty easily. I'm just a little concerned.
So I hear you. If there was a game where I would feel that way, I would feel a little bit more about it being the Rutgers game than this game, because I just think that's a much better coaching staff, and we don't need to go too long into that one, because I'm really excited to talk about this game. Going to UCLA is going to be so weird, where, in the 40%, if that, full Rose Bowl, I can't get behind what they're doing. I know they've been a thorn in Washington's side on the recruiting trail with a couple of guys, David Schwartzel, Anthony Jones. I don't think that's going to translate on the field. I'm not super high on what Nikolai Emeliava is going to bring this offense. He's certainly very, very talented. I just don't have a lot of faith in Deshaun Foster and the rest of this coaching staff. We saw a couple of things where it's oh, okay, here's something to get excited about. That's something to get excited about. And then they built up a little bit of momentum, and it just kind of all seemed to fall apart. I haven't been impressed with it. And I think this isn't one of those signature wins, but this is something where I would have, in terms of where I have them in record predictions right now, I'd have them moving to 9-2 if you win this game. This is just something where, obviously Jedd Fisch in his time at UCLA, homecoming of sorts, where I know he's been back with Arizona as well. But this could be a really nice win for Washington, where all of a sudden, I'm sure people will be talking about them in some way, shape, or form. But if Washington gets to 9 wins ahead of the Oregon game, I feel like a lot of national analysts are really going to catch on and just say, oh, hey, Washington, this is a real sleeper team. Watch out for everything they're doing. They've got a defense that's really rolling. Damon Williams is doing whatever with the offense. Jonah Coleman is where he is. There's so much to like about Washington. And if they're at 9 wins at this point in the season, obviously it's still really late, but if you can get there before the final game and have that opportunity to get to 10 against Oregon, there's going to be a lot of hype around this Washington team.
As there should be. And I think, I wouldn't be surprised if Nico's in the transfer portal by the time this game comes around. I honestly I love a kike, everything that, you got a kike and you got a few guys on the staff that I know down there. I don't know if Jerry's still down there, but there's enough down there. I can see the vision, what they thought initially, but there's no chance that Washington loses this game. Let's 9-2. Let's just get on to the game that people actually care about.
All right, let's talk about Oregon. I feel very, very similar to this game as I do the Michigan game, where right now I have it as a loss. I can't get behind Dan Lanning and his coaching staff, man. I can't. It's something I talked about with Spencer on a crossover show we did a couple of weeks ago, which all the everydayers know. The comment section on that episode was wonderful, by the way. Really appreciate all you guys for that. But I look at this roster. I'm not sold on Dante Moore. I think this offensive line has a lot of individual talents on it. Like Isaiah World, Emmanuel Pregnon. I don't think this defense is nearly as good. I think we're going to see it take a step back. I don't know what they're going to do at receiver. I know they've got a lot of talented young guys, and if one of them steps up, all right, cool, good for you. I know Kenny Sadiq is really good. Again, right now I have this game as a loss, but I really want to see what this first 6 weeks looks like for Oregon, because if it looks like, it looks like what they had in non-conference last year, where they struggled against Idaho, they struggled against Boise State. I don't know, man, because you got Penn State in there. Their schedule is not very tough. I don't believe in them. And so I, again, have a loss to move to 9-3. This is subject to change.
For all those reasons you said, and well, first of all, let's address the lie in the room that you started out with. You can definitely get behind Dan Lanning. Have you seen, he's definitely a fullback now. You can get behind Dan Lanning. You absolutely can get behind Dan Lanning. No, but with that being said, no, to make sure the point being, coming to fruition here, I do think all those reasons you mentioned, it's not, Marcus Mariota, it's not Justin Herbert, it's Dante Moore, who's a fine quarterback, but we haven't seen it. And I have similar questions, like, can the offense come together under Wilson again? Does the defense, is Tosh still down there?
Yeah, he is.
Okay, yeah. So again, as long as Tosh is down there, they're going to have phenomenal recruiting abilities, but I never really see it come to fruition on Saturdays when you're coaching. And I think for all those reasons and more, this is a win that Washington should have. And I think especially coming back to Husky Stadium, like I said before, if this game is in Eugene, much like if the Ohio State game is in Columbus, I don't feel as good about it. But I think for everything that Jed has said, you come in, you get a few signature wins, and then you finish it off with 10-2 at home at Husky Stadium. Whether or not you make the playoffs, because again, dropping the game that I have at Maryland, dropping the other one at Michigan, who are probably not going to be ranked losses in terms of, like, I don't know, they're going to be ugly losses. Like, that's to me going to be, are you in the playoffs or you're not, but you're right there on the cusp of it.
No, I disagree with you a little bit there with your prediction, the way you have it set up, having, a couple of bad losses with Maryland, and where was the other one? Was it Michigan?
Yeah, it was Michigan. Yeah.
So Michigan, I don't think would be a bad loss. I think with the way your schedule shapes up, with wins over Ohio State and Oregon, that gets you into the playoff. Yeah. I think that, with 9-3, having two of those losses for me be Ohio State and Oregon right now, you're on the cusp of it, and there's an opportunity to get there if things bounce the right way for you, depending on what happens elsewhere. I think the main point that I've taken away from this, because we didn't share these record predictions beforehand. We wanted to come into this somewhat blind. There's going to be so much steam around this Washington team that I don't think has been realized just yet. And it's what we've tried to communicate all summer, is there's a lot to like about what Jedd Fisch is building with this program. And so many of the just mishaps and the different things we saw last year were self-inflicted. And if you can just find a way to get out of your own way this season, which I think is very, very possible, where you can improve the offensive play calling by having DeMond Williams at the helm. You can improve the run defense by just having more bodies in the front seven. You have the opportunity to take a big step forward. And if you get average play from your offensive line, if you get average to slightly above average play from your defensive line, some of those losses from last year turn into wins. You're not going to have as bad luck. You're not going to have a 1-4 record in one-score games like you did last season. Those things tend to even out. So I really like where this program is going.
Yeah, and if you think about it, what's something else Jed did last season that he could say he did this season? Be undefeated at home.
Yeah.
Think about it, again, in my prediction, again, I know you're
your prediction, yes.
But I do think it is worth noting too, this isn't a CYA situation, but you did say both those games are winnable games. The Oregon game is very much winnable. So if Oregon beats them, I'm not going to be surprised, but I do think it'll be a very close, good game. And I certainly think Washington should win that game. The Ohio State game more so, okay, Ohio State wins, but it's 35-32, 35-30. I won't be surprised because, okay, you hung with Ohio State at home, and they probably had, again, injuries. We don't know what they're going to be, but, as long as you're not getting blown out in any of those games, there's no real cause for concern. But I do think that they will come out on the other end of the season because both are at home.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers tuning in. We really do appreciate the support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout I think I can say season now, because we are that close to just being back in action with fall camp. So make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. That's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel through content every single day. So please make sure you click that like button, click the little bell so you never miss when we post a new video. Any questions, comments, concerns, drop right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please give us a 5-star review, as it does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Tuesday.